The lantern light flickered against the rough-hewn beams of the barn, casting long shadows over Sarah's trembling hands. She knew she shouldn't be here. If her dead father woke up and saw her empty bed, the shame would be unbearable. But the note hidden inside her apron burned against her skin. "Meet me by the old oak," it had said. Sarah pushed the heavy barn door open, the rusty hinge groaning just loud enough to stop her heart. She stepped out into the cool night air. There, leaning against the fence, stood Levi. He looked different. He looked like an Englisher, but when he turned, his eyes were the same. And Sarah knew, in that terrifying, beautiful moment, that her life was about to break in. The morning mist clung to the valleys of Holmes County like a soft, white quilt that God himself had laid over the earth to keep it sleeping just a little longer. It was October, the time of year when the air turns crisp and smells of wood smoke and drying corn stalks. On the Yoder farm, the day had begun long before the sun crested the eastern ridge. The rooster had crowed at 4, and the rhythmic sound of milk hitting the metal pail was already echoing from the barn. Sarah Yoder sat on the milking stool, her forehead resting against the warm flank of a Holstein cow named Bessie. Sarah was 21 years old, with eyes the color of the summer sky and a spirit that was usually as calm as the creek that ran behind the farmhouse. Usually, but not today. Today, her hands trembled slightly as she finished the milking. Today was market day in town, but that wasn't why her heart was beating like a trapped bird in her chest. News traveled fast in the community, faster than a buggy on a paved road. He was back. Levi Troyer. The name alone made Sarah's breath catch. 2 years ago, Levi had turned 18 and entered his Rumspringa, time when Amish youth go out into the world to decide if they wish to be baptized into the church. Most came back within a few months, realizing that the English world, with its cars and noise and electricity, held no peace for them. But Levi had stayed away. There were rumors, of course. Some said he was working on a construction crew in Cleveland. Others said he had bought a truck and was driving all the way to California. Sarah had tried not to listen. She had tried to bury the memory of his smile, the way he used to tease her when they were children, pulling on her braids during school. Sarah, the voice of her mother, Mongmi, cut through her thoughts. Sarah jumped, nearly knocking over the milk pail. She quickly composed herself, smoothing her apron and adjusting her prayer covering, ensuring every pin was in place. "Coming, Mongmi," Sarah called back. She carried the heavy pails to the milk house, the metal handles digging into her palms. It was a good pain. It reminded her of her duty. She was a Yoder. Her father, Abram, was a deacon in the church. There was no room in her life for a boy who had turned his back on the Ordnung, the rules that kept their community holy and separate. Breakfast was a quiet affair, as it always was. The family sat around the long wooden table, Abram at the head, Mungem to his right, and Sarah's 3 younger brothers lining the bench. They bowed their heads in silent prayer. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. After the silent amen, Abram cleared his throat. He was a stern man, his beard gray and long, his face weathered by 50 years of farming. "We have much to do for the market," Abram said, buttering a thick slice of homemade bread. "The apple butter is ready, and the quilts are packed. Samuel King will be meeting us there to help unload." Sarah froze, her spoon hovering over her oatmeal. Samuel King. He was a good man. He was 23, baptized, and owned his own woodworking shop. He had asked Abram for permission to drive Sarah home from the singing next Sunday. Everyone knew what that meant. He intended to court her. "That is good. Dead," Sarah said softly, keeping her eyes on her bowl. "Samuel is very helpful." Mungum looked at Sarah, her gaze sharp but kind. Mothers always knew. She knew Sarah didn't look at Samuel the way a woman should look at a future husband. But in their world, butterflies in the stomach were not as important as shared faith and hard work. The buggy ride to town was slow. The clip-clop of the horses' hooves on the asphalt was a hypnotic rhythm. Sarah sat in the back, watching the fields roll by. The trees were blazing with autumn colors, fiery reds, burnt oranges, and deep golds. It was beautiful, but Sarah felt a gray cloud hanging over her heart. When they arrived at the market, the noise was overwhelming. Tourists English ter suere berihuer, snapping pictures with their cameras and pointing at the buggies. Sarah kept her head down, carrying the jars of apple butter to their stall. And then she felt it, a gaze, heavy and warm, fixed upon her. So looked up across the crowded aisle. Standing near a pretzel stand was a young man. He was not dressed plain. He wore blue jeans with a belt, a plaid button-down shirt, and heavy work boots. His hair was cut short, in the English style, not the bowl cut of the Amish men. But the eyes, those deep, brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, it was Levi. He wasn't smiling. He was just looking at her, an expression of intense longing on his face. He took a step toward her, and Sarah felt the world tilt. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to run away from him. "Sarah, the change box, please." Her father's voice was right beside her. Sarah snapped her head back, her face flushing hot. She fumbled for the metal box under the table. When she stood up again and dared to look back at the pretzel stand, Levi was gone. The week following the market dragged on like a winter, with no end. Every time a buggy passed the farm, Sarah looked up, hoping, fearing. It was Tuesday evening when the breach happened. Sarah was in the vegetable garden, pulling the last of the carrots before the frost set in. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and blue. "Sarah," the whisper came from the edge of the cornfield. Sarah dropped her basket. She knew the voice. She looked around frantically. Her brothers were in the barn. Mungim was in the kitchen. Dad was in his study, reading the Bible. She walked slowly toward the tall, dry stalks of corn. Levi stepped out from the shadows. He was dressed in English clothes again, but he held a straw hat in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. "Levi," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you cannot be here. If Dad sees you... ... "I know," Levi said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "I had to see you, Sarah. I saw you at the market, and I couldn't leave without speaking to you." "You left 2 years ago," Sarah said, a sudden flash of anger rising in her chest. "You left us. You left... ... me." Levi looked down at his boots. "I had to know what was out there, Sarah. You know, I always had too many questions." The bishop said, "My questions were a weakness. I had to see if the English world had the answers." "And did it?" Sarah asked, stepping closer despite herself. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Levi looked up, meeting her eyes. "I found noise. I found money. I found that people rush around so fast, they forget to breathe. But I didn't find peace, Sarah. And I didn't find you." The air between them crackled. This was dangerous. This was forbidden. Levi was technically in his Rumspringa, so the church could not shun him yet. But for Sarah, a baptized member, to be meeting a boy alone in the cornfield, it was a sin. It was deceptive. "I am to be courted by Samuel King," Sarah blurted out. As if using Samuel's name as a shield, Levi flinched. "Samuel, he is a good man. He follows the rules. He is a faithful man," Sarah corrected. "Do you love him?" Levi asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "Love grows," Sarah recited the phrase she had heard 1,000 times. "It grows from duty and shared life." "Love is a fire, Sarah," Levi said, stepping close enough that she could smell the scent of pine shavings and rain on his jacket. "You can't build a fire out of cold ashes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It took Sarah Sahanda. Shocking, electric touch, and pressed the object into her palm. "I made this for you," he whispered. "I've been working on it for months." It was a wooden carving of a small bird, a cardinal. It was exquisite. The wings were detailed down to the individual feathers. It was smooth and warm. "Levi, I'm staying at my uncle's place on the edge of the county," Levi said hurriedly. "I'm not leaving yet. Meet me Sunday night, after the singing, by the covered bridge." "I can't," Sarah gasped. "Samuel is driving me home." "Then tell him no," Levi said. His eyes were pleading. Please, Sarah, just 1 hour. I need to tell you what I've decided. Before she could answer, the back door of the house creaked open. Sarah, is that you? It was her brother, Amos. Go, Sarah hissed to Levi. Go. Now. Levi melted back into the cornstalks like a ghost. Sarah stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs, clutching the wooden bird so tight it hurt her hand. Sarah, Amos called again, walking toward the garden. I'm here, Amos, Sarah called back, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Just getting the last carrots. She slipped the wooden bird into the deep pocket of her apron. It felt heavy there. It felt like a secret that could sink her. Sunday arrived with a gray, overcast sky. The church service was held at the Miller farm that week. The service was 3 hours long, filled with slow Shantlock singing from the Ausband hymn book and sermons preached in Pennsylvania, Dutch. Sarah sat on the hard backless bench with the other women, trying to focus on the bishop's words about humility and submission, but her mind kept drifting to the covered bridge, to Levi. After the service, the simple lunch of bean soup and bread was served. Samuel King found her near the water pump. He was dressed in his Sunday best black vest, white shirt, broad-brimmed hat. He smiled at her, a kind, safe smile. The soup is good today, Samuel said. Yeah, very good, Sarah replied, forcing a smile. Sarah, Samuel said, shifting his weight. I have spoken to your dad. He gave his blessing for me to drive you home tonight in my buggy. This was it. If she said yes, the community would see them as a couple. If she said no, she would shame him and confuse her father. Sarah looked at Samuel's hands. They were clean, steady hands. He would be a good husband. He would never leave her to go to the city. He would never make her heart race with fear and excitement. Double quotes. Sarah started. She touched the pocket of her dress, where the wooden bird was hidden. Samuel, I have a headache today. A bad one. I think I will ride home with my family. Samuel's face fell. He looked confused, hurt. Oh, I see. Perhaps next time? Perhaps, Sarah whispered. She felt a wave of guilt so strong it almost made her knees buckle. She was lying. She was becoming a liar. That night, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The house was silent. Sarah waited until the grandfather clock chimed 11. She put on her black bonnet and her shawl. She didn't wear shoes. The stairs were too creaky. She carried her boots in her hand. She slipped out the back door, the cool mud of the yard squishing between her toes before she sat on the porch steps to pull on her boots. She ran. She ran through the pasture, dodging the sleeping cows. She ran until her lungs burned. The covered bridge was a mile away, spanning Cedar Creek. When she arrived, the interior of the bridge was pitch black. Levi, she whispered. A match struck. A flame flared to life, lighting a kerosene lantern. Levi was sitting on one of the bridge trusses, Aoped dune. You came, he said, sounding surprised. I lied to Samuel, Sarah said, the tears finally spilling over. I lied to my father. I am full of sin, Levi. Levi reached out but didn't touch her. He saw her distress. It is not a sin to follow your heart, Sarah. It is if my heart leads me away from God, she sobbed. Does it? Levi asked. Sarah, listen to me. I'm coming back. The world stopped. The sound of the creek faded away. What? Sarah breath. I'm coming back. Levi rebiated to the church. To the life. I'm done with the English world. I want to be baptized. I want to buy the old Miller plot next to your father's land. Joy, bright and blinding, exploded in Sarah's chest. Lebi, that ease wonder bar. But, Levi said, his face serious, I cannot do it if you marry Samuel. Primera need took no Sarah. If I come back, if I cut my hair and put on the plain clothes ... will you wait for me? Will you let me court you? Yes, Sarah said, the word leaving her mouth before she could think. Yes, Levi, always. He smiled then, a true, brilliant smile. He reached for her hand. Sarah, Yoder. The voice boomed through the wooden tunnel of the bridge like a cannon shot. They spun around. Standing at the entrance of the bridge, holding a high-powered flashlight, was Bishop Abram Yoder, Sarah's father. And beside him stood the bishop. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She pulled her hand away from Levi as if she had been burned. "Dad," she whimpered. Abram walked forward, his face a mask of fury and heartbreak. He shone the light on Levi. "Levi Troyer," Abram said, his voice shaking. "You act the part of the wolf. You dressed in English clothes and lure our daughter into the dark." "I am coming back, Abram," Levi said, standing tall. "I intend to join the church." "You intend?" The bishop spoke now, his voice quiet and cold. "Intentions are wind. Actions are stone. You are not a member. You are in the world, and you are meeting a baptized woman in secret in the middle of the night." The bishop turned to Sarah. "Sarah, go to the buggy." "Now, but now," Abram roared. Sarah looked at Levi one last time. His eyes were filled with pain. She turned and ran to her father's buggy, climbing inside, burying her face in her hands. The days that followed were the darkest of Sarah's life. She was not shown the meet be, 'cause she had confessed her sin to the church and asked for forgiveness. But the shame was a heavy cloak she wore every day. She was forbidden from leaving the farm. She was forbidden from speaking to Levi. Levi had tried to visit. Abram had met him at the end of the driveway, with a shotgun rested across his arm, not to use it, but as a sing. "Go away." Winter came hard that year. The snow piled up against the barn doors. The wind howled through the eaves of the house. Sarah worked. She scrubbed the pine floors until her knuckles were raw. She canned hundreds of jars of beets and corn. She quilted until her eyes blurred. She prayed, "Oh, God, please guide him. Please keep him." But silence stretches, and doubt creeps in. Weeks turned into months. There was no word from Levi. Had he given up? Had Abram scared him away? Had he gone back to the English world, where girls didn't have fathers who waited with shotguns? In February, Samuel King came to visit. He sat in the parlor with Abram and Sarah. "Sarah," Samuel said gently, "I know there has been ... trouble, but my regard for you has not changed. The Bible says we must forgive. I want to offer you a fresh start." Abram looked at Sarah. The pressure was immense. If she married Samuel, the shame would be wiped away. She would be a respectable Amish wife. Order would be restored. Sarah looked at the snow falling outside the window. She felt cold. "I need time." "Samuel, the spring," Abram said firmly. "By the spring planting, Sarah will give her answer." March arrived. The snow began to melt into mud. The sap began to run in the maple trees. It was time for the Shuganoff collecting the maple syrup. Sarah was carrying buckets of sap to the sugar shack. She was tired. Her spirit felt hollow. She had heard a rumor from her brother Amos. "I heard Levi Troyer sold his truck," Amos had said at breakfast, chewing on his toast. "Some say he left town on a bus." Left town! The words echoed in her mind. He was gone. He had promised to come back, but he had left. The heartbreak was a physical pain, a sharp ache in the center of her chest. She sat down on a stump in the woods and wept. She cried for the wooden bird hidden in her drawer. She cried for the life she had imagined. She wiped her face. She stood up. She picked up the buckets. "I will marry Samuel," she whispered to the trees. "I will be a good wife." Palm Sunday. The Sunday before Easter. The church service was being held at the Yoder farm. The buggies lined the long driveway. The men gathered in the barn. The women in the house. It was the day new members were to be instructed before their baptism at Easter. It was a holy day. Sarah moved through the kitchen like a machine, preparing the platters of cheese and cold cuts. Se, felt, numb. She had told her father that she would accept Samuel's proposal after the service. The service began. The benches were packed. The bishop stood at the front, reading from the German scriptures. The door at the back of the room opened. Heads turned. It was late for someone to arrive. A figure stepped in. He was wearing a black suit, a white shirt, no tie. He held a black, wide-brimmed hat in his hands. His hair was cut in the traditional bowl style, circling his head. His face was clean-shaven, as he was not yet married. It was Levi. A murmur went through the room. The bishop stopped reading. Levi walked down the center aisle. He did not look at Sarah. He looked straight at the bishop. He stopped in front of the ministers. "I am here," Levi said, his voice ringing clear in the silent room. "I am here to put away the world. I am here to confess my sins and ask to be instructed for baptism." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. He hadn't left. He hadn't gone back to the city. He had gone away to prepare, to sell his truck, to buy his plain clothes, to get ready. The bishop looked at Levi for a long time. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, slowly, the bishop nodded. "If the heart is true, the door is open," the bishop said. He pointed to the bench where the young men sat. "Seath." Levi nodded. He turned to sit. As he did, his eyes found Sarah's. He didn't smile. It was Solomon. But in his eyes, she saw the promise. "I did this for God, but I also did this for you." After the service, the mood was electric. Everyone was talking about Levi's return. Sarah found herself standing near the buggy shed. Samuel walked up to her. He looked sad, but resigned. "He came back," Samuel said. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "He came back for you, Sarah," Samuel said with a sigh. "I can see it." A blind man could see it. Samuel looked at her, then at the ground. "I do not want a wife whose heart lives in another man's chest. That is not God's will." Sarah looked at Samuel with new respect. "You are a good man, Samuel. You deserve to be loved fully." "Yeah," Samuel nodded. "I do." He tipped his hat and walked away. A moment later, Levi was there. He looked different in the plain clothes. He looked like he belonged. "Sarah," he said. "You sold your truck," she said, a smile breaking through her tears. "I don't need a truck," Levi said softly. "I have everything I need right here." He didn't touch her. They were in public, but the space between them vibrated with love. "I have to prove myself to your father," Levi said. "I have to work the land. I have to be baptized. It will take time. Can you wait?" Sarah reached into her pocket. She had carried the wooden bird with her every day. She showed it to him, hidden in the cup of her hand. "I have waited through the winter, Levi," she said. "I can wait for the spring." The sun was setting over the valley, casting a golden light over the rows of harvested corn. Sarah stood on the porch of a small white farmhouse. It wasn't big, but it was sturdy. The flower beds were overflowing with marigolds. "Dinner is almost ready," she called out. Levi had walked up from the barn. He was dirty, covered in dust and sweat, his beard now growing along his jawline, marking him as a married man. He walked up the steps and paused to scrape the mud off his boots. He looked at Sarah. The love in his eyes hadn't faded. It had only deepened, rooted like the old oak tree by the creek. He reached out and gently took her hand rough, calloused hand, holding a soft, working hand. "How is he?" Levi asked, nodding toward the woven bassinet on the porch. Sarah smiled and looked down at the sleeping baby, wrapped in a blue quilt. "He is sleeping. He has your nose." Levi laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed across the fields. He put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her close. They stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Two plain people living a simple life, bound by a love that had weathered the storm. "God is good," Levi whispered. "All the time," Sarah replied, and as the first star appeared in the evening sky, they turned and walked into the warmth of their home, closing the door against the night.